When we have about one or two more questions. With that, I will turn it over to Senator Merkley to kick us off.
Greetings, everyone. Republicans have shut down our government to cut health care for Americans. Since March 15th, we've seen Trump seizing authoritarian powers and the passage of his so-called big, beautiful bill, which many of us call a big, ugly betrayal, because it does enormous damage to American families, ripping health care away from some 15 million Americans by slashing Medicaid and gutting the tax credits that help families afford insurance. And why? Why do these things? To fund massive tax giveaways for billionaires. That's what's at the center of this shutdown debate. It's a debate between two visions. The vision of the Republican Party is now families lose and billionaires win. But there's a better vision for the future, a vision that Democrats are fighting for, including fighting for this health care fix. That's families thrive and billionaires pay their fair share. We put forward a very reasonable proposal to reopen the government. It says, first, undo these harmful cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act that will devastate the quality and affordability of health care. And second, guaranteeing that the president implements the government funding bill as written and as required under the Constitution. Since returning to office in January, Trump has pursued every possible strategy to implement only the programs he likes while ignoring the rest. Let's be clear. It's illegal and it's unconstitutional to ignore the laws passed by Congress. The president is not a king, and the laws are not suggestions. While I know that the president's team want to raise doubts about that, the Supreme Court has ruled twice on this question. In 1975, they said President Nixon was wrong and unconstitutional when he impounded funds. And in 1998, they ruled that, in fact, there cannot be a line item veto, and the president has to implement government spending bills as written by Congress. So Democrats are making two reasonable requests: save health care for working families and implement spending bills as written, as required by the Constitution. Over the last 9 months, Trump has consistently violated the Constitution's separation of powers and checks and balances. And we see it in so many different ways. We see it in the attack on freedom of the press. We see it in the attack on freedom of speech. We see it in the militarization or weaponization of the Department of Justice to go after political enemies. But in the process of his policies, both the big, beautiful bill and also the use of tariffs, he's made America sicker and poorer. And that brings me to the second major topic we need to discuss: the great danger posed by Trump sending troops into Portland and other American cities. Last Thursday, just 6 days ago, Trump said in remarks in the Oval Office, quote, "We're going to get out there and we're going to do a pretty big number on those people in Portland." And on Friday, Portland city officials, members of Congress, including myself, had a press conference. I called the press conference the "Don't Take the Bait" press conference, because here's Trump's strategy: is to create conflict and then use that conflict to justify expanding his authoritarian measures. So I was saying to folks in Portland, definitely protest. That's the American right. Use your freedom of speech, your freedom of something, but don't take the bait and interact with these federal troops that Trump is organizing in order to try to create conflict. Don't take the bait. On Saturday, September 27th, just a few days ago, he posted on Truth Social that he was sending, quote, "all necessary troops to Portland." And I really like what the mayor said, that the necessary troops is 0. And then he went on to say, that as Trump did, that he was authorizing full force if necessary. Well, that sounded pretty threatening. And then Tuesday, he spoke to the generals and other military leaders assembled at Quantico, where he said, "And if you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave the room. Of course, there goes your rank. there goes your future. What Trump was saying is he wants the military to be loyal to him, not to the Constitution, but loyal to him. And if you don't like it, leave and you're done. Those who stay, I expect you to follow my lead. This type of loyalty test is extremely dangerous in our country. There's a reason officers take an oath to the Constitution, not to the opinions of the president. Well, Trump is proceeding to experiment with something that's extraordinarily dangerous in a republic, and it's how to use the military domestically. And we have put up some safeguards against that. And they've safeguards have been in place 150 years. And those safeguards are, and I think they're captured primarily by the Posse Comitatus law. It says basically you can't deploy troops inside the United States. Those troops, that standing military, all that combined power, that's not for controlling things inside the US, that's for defending the US against foreign powers. Now, there is under Title 10 two exceptions for this. And those two exceptions are one, an invasion, and second, a rebellion. Well, clearly, there is nothing happening in Portland that meets what those terms were meant to imply. An invasion. Another nation has ships offshore. They're sending troops ashore. They're invading us. No, that's not happening. A rebellion. Well, a rebellion would be a very organized force trying to overthrow elected leadership in the United States. Maybe it's a rebellion to take out a state government. Maybe it's a rebellion to organize and try to take out the federal government. But it's a highly organized, militarized operation trying to overthrow the government. Well, think Shays' Rebellion, when you had at the very start of our country a whole horde of folks, a whole crowd of folks who were so upset they organized into a militia and they were trying to coordinate a raid on a national store of armaments. That's a rebellion. Clearly, neither of these exist in Portland. But here is the president using that exception to send military forces into our state. Now, in fact, mostly what he's doing is federalizing our Oregon National Guard, 200 members. But then he's bringing in the Northern Command leadership that operates out of Colorado to be in charge of those folks. Our adjutant general in charge of our Oregon National Guard will no longer be in charge of them on this assignment. You know, the president went on to say, we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military National Guard. We're doing into Chicago, or we're going into Chicago very soon. Because he claims, and I quote, we're under invasion from within. That should sound very McCarthyist to Americans. And we have internal enemies, and they're an invading force. Well, that's certainly not the exception, what invasion meant under Title 10. Let's be clear, our fellow citizens are not our enemies. And we must not let an authoritarian president turn neighbor against neighbor. The founders were so wary of having standing armies. And once we did, 150 years ago, we put safeguards in place to prevent this kind of abuse of power. So we must insist the military not be used in this fashion. There's going to be a district court hearing for a potential stay this Friday. A challenge I read from the experts is that the term rebellion and the term invasion are not well defined in federal law. But all of us, using our common sense, understand that a couple of conflicts outside of the ICE building, easily handled by the local police, do not constitute the type of rebellion or invasion that the writers of that law were talking about. Free speech, free assembly, peaceful protests, those are not rebellions or invasions. In fact, they're honored rights of every citizen. You know, last week I toured the ICE facility that Trump says is under siege. I talked to the regional administrator who proceeds to control Alaska and Washington and Oregon. And I relayed to her an article from the Oregonian. And the article said our staff, in other words, the Oregonian staff, had witnessed the forces outside the ICE building attacking peaceful protesters. And I said to her, doesn't this upset you? And she said, well, they're not our people. They're not ICE. I said, but they're defending your building. Shouldn't you go and meet with them, the Federal Protective Service, and say that's absolutely unacceptable? It is unacceptable in America for militarized forces to attack peaceful protesters. I encouraged her because she demurred and didn't really respond to whether she would take on this responsibility. I encouraged her, said, if you're not willing to answer now, go away from this, but do it. Even if you're not going to tell us, you're going to do it. Do it because this is wrong and it's provoking interactions designed to accelerate, conflict. And of course, sending more federal agents into Portland is exactly what Trump's trying to do, is accelerate conflict. Here is our understanding of the status of the troop deployments. 200 members of the Oregon National Guard have been federalized. They're going to go Camp Relia, Armed Forces Training Center in Warrenton for 3 to 5 days for training in crowd control, training in the rules for the use of force before being deployed. We have conflicting reports about the length of the deployment. The last one I heard was it was going 15 days to gear up and gear down and 45 days to be on mission. But other reports have it being a longer period. And then leadership from U.S. Northern Command taking charge. That's the command that's headquartered out of Colorado Springs. I had understood that there might be a roughly 20 individuals coming from U.S. North Com to constitute that command structure. But again, the details are vague. But let's be clear. These federal agents, even if they are federalized Oregon National Guard, they're uninvited, they're unnecessary, and they are unacceptable under our law. So our message to President Trump is simple. Stay out of Portland. And President Trump, you need to end your efforts to have an authoritarian takeover. We are in the most perilous moment for our Constitution since the Civil War. We have never seen such a combination of attacks on our freedom of expression and our freedom of press and our freedom of assembly. We've never seen such attacks on our universities and our law firms. We've never seen such a militarization or weaponization of our Department of Justice to go against folks that Trump doesn't like, including he's targeted a member of the U.S. Senate, Adam Schiff from California. So end this authoritarian takeover and sit down with Democrats, address these 2 reasonable claims, and reopen the government. Thank you all, and we'll open it up for your questions.
Folks could raise their hands, that would be awesome, and then the senator can call on you one by one.
I'm just going to do this as folks appear on my screen in the first hands in the upper left corner. And looks like Mr. I'm going to mispronounce, but is it M. Lehman Winners?
Oh, Senator, it might be oh yeah, you're unmuted, you can go ahead, yep.
We are not hearing you for some reason, even though we see your mouth moving. And it looked like you were unmuted, so I'm not sure. While we're figuring that out, let's turn to KVAL News.
Senator, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. And I say I'm well with some hesitation because this is certainly a difficult year for our nation.
Absolutely. Could you kind of describe what the common ground would be as far as the Medicare cuts? I mean, it's kind of impossible what you're asking for just to completely undo the cuts. So do you know kind of like a common ground that the Democrats and Republicans could agree on?
Well, I don't agree that it's impossible at all. The first phase is the phase that affects the tax credits on the exchange. And those folks buying on the exchange are facing the most recent national estimate was an average of 75% increase in the cost of their premiums. For Oregon, the projected increase is 68% increase. So we're not talking about 2% inflation, 3%, no, 68% inflation or $1,300 per person, with some families having to pay as much as $8,000 to $25,000 more. That's massive. And not just long ago, Republicans were on the floor coming over and saying, this is terrible for us. Like, we got to undo this because this is going to have such an impact and it's going to start next month. And we're like, yes, that's right. That's why we're saying this has to stop. Meanwhile, the second phase goes into effect in January of 2027. And that phase is the red carpet for the rich because you've got those ongoing tax breaks for the richest Americans, but they're being paid for by red tape designed to make it very difficult for people to stay on Medicaid. And that should be addressed right now too. And we've included that so that people know now, because we started to hear hospitals and clinics say in anticipation, and given how thin of funds we have, we are already preparing for that January 27 by starting to cut back programs. So even though the projection of the law isn't in effect until, well, a little bit more than a year from now, already it's having an impact. So those are the two pieces. There is a third piece that comes in 2028 that we didn't address. In other words, that's further out, more time. They'll be past the next election, more time to address it. And that piece says that the way that the state raises money for its match has to, through provider taxes, has to be squished down. And that will make it very hard for states to raise the money for their state match, which means they may have to dial back their programs in a much larger way. And that's not even really accounted for in this whole 15 million people losing healthcare program. So the first two pieces that are in the near term, having near term effect, those are the two pieces we're focused on. I think that's incredibly reasonable. And a bunch of my colleagues on the Republican side have already said they hate that portion of the bill. And so it's not as if that's an outrageous proposal. In fact, we're essentially saving the Republicans from their own political and policy mistake that is going to hurt them horrendously in the next election. Why are we willing to do that? Because it matters. Healthcare matters. It's going to hurt so many families. So we're not willing to hurt families in order to help our political prospects. Quite the opposite. We're going to fight for those families. Let the chips fall where they may.
And last question, if deploying troops is too much, what do you think the fix in Portland is to kind of tone down the violence on the streets?
When you say if deploying troops is too much, in other words, there are requests that they not be deployed?
Yeah. So if you disagree with deploying troops, then what is kind of the solution that you have in mind?
Well, the first answer I put forward was if troops are deployed, do not take the bait. Do not go down and involve yourself in a conflict with them. And so and that message has been picked up. When I called it the don't take the bait press conference, you've heard the same words come out of the governor's mouth, many others repeating that. That is step one. Step two is we are challenging this in court. And there's a hearing this Friday with a district judge. And the argument is going to be this does not meet the test of a rebellion. This does not meet the test of invasion. And therefore, to get a stay on the street deployment of these forces. What comes after that, if we don't get the stay, is going to be accentuating this effort to prevent a growing cycle of violence. That's exactly what the president wants. How do you accomplish that? Well, I know the mayor and the governor are deeply engaged in the local strategies for that. I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope we get the stay. I'm told by legal experts, as I mentioned, that the definition of rebellion and invasion are somewhat vague. There's not an established line, elaborate definition of a four-part test or something like that. And so it makes it harder for a judge to say, no, this clearly doesn't meet the test because the test hasn't been clearly delineated. But I sure as hell hope common sense prevails because there's nothing close to what the writers of that law intended and when they talked about a rebellion like a Shays Rebellion, or an invasion, like a foreign force off our shore coming ashore.
Hey, folks, I see a couple people in the queue. Just want to remind folks to quick questions so we can get through everyone. We've got 7 folks. Thank you so much.
And just proceeding with I don't know if you all see the same screen I see, but in my screen, Lars is next. And Lars, you're still muted.
Senator, why does it make sense to shut the government down, reject a bipartisan bill, and why does it make sense for Americans to fund health care for illegal aliens who are in our country, which is part of what the Democrats are insisting on?
Well, it's a Republican shutdown. They hold all the keys to the kingdom. They hold the House, the Senate, the presidency. President Trump himself said back in 2013, when he was not yet president, that it's incumbent upon the president to bring folks together and work out a deal. But when he's in the Oval Office, President Trump took a different direction. He proceeded to say, I'm not talking. He hadn't had a single meeting with Democratic leadership since he came into office in January. And then he pressured the House leader, the Speaker, and the Majority Leader not to meet with their counterparts in the House and Senate. And this is just, this is craziness to say that you're not even going to talk, because we've always, in the history of our country, with the exception of last March 15th, had bipartisan bills. Now, you refer to this as a bipartisan continuing resolution?
Yep.
No, it's not bipartisan. It is, in fact, what the Republicans use the term clean, meaning they want to continue the partisan CR from March.
Didn't Senator Fetterman vote for it?
Well, you can call it bipartisan because there are a couple Democrats.
Yeah, that's what I call bipartisan,
no,
Senator. I'm wondering, a bipartisan bill that your side is voting
Hey,
for.
Lars, we got to keep it moving. So I want the senator to finish his question.
I get to give you an answer, but we're not engaging in a big back and forth here. But the simple fact is, bipartisan here means folks sat down and worked out a bipartisan deal. This was a pure partisan continuation of the bill from March 15th.
Alex, we'll turn it over to you to keep it rolling. Thank you so much.
Thank you. 2 quick ones. One, is there anything that's more salient or granular besides healthcare and impoundments that Democrats are sort of aligned with as far as this shutdown goes? I'm just wondering what else you would telegraph that is, I think leading up to this, there were calls for demanding that the Trump administration stop allowing federal officers to be masked, demanding that National Guard troops no longer be deployed to cities. Besides impoundments and healthcare, is there anything else you could say Democrats are behind this as a central issue? That's why we're leveraging this moment.
We have a long list of disagreements with where Trump's families lose, billionaires win agenda goes. We disagree with his effort to massively cut scientific research on diseases, from childhood cancer to dementia. We disagree with his massive increase in the cost of drugs. We disagree with this tariff policy that's a sales tax on all of America and doesn't allow any investment decisions to be made. We disagree with the cuts to child care. But
Senator Merkley, I appreciate it.
let me just explain, Alex, that therefore, given all the things we disagree with, we have put forward a very modest, just 2 points to address this. And that shows you how modest our proposal is.
Okay. And last quick one. I met with protesters outside of the ICE facility this weekend, some who have been there for months. They've seen you go in, Senator Wyden, Rep. Dexter. They said that nobody talks to them. Of the politicians that go into the building, they don't come out and talk to folks. And I'm wondering if that's true for you, and if not, why not go talk to the protesters out there, who I would agree are, on the whole, mostly nonviolent. The war zone characterization is wild to me.
Well, I saw 3 protesters down the block with it looked like signs with flowers. I do intend to go back down. I did when the protest occurred in 2020. I went down multiple times and talked to protesters. But on that day, we went way over our schedule, so I didn't stop to talk to them then. But I assure you, I've had those conversations before, and I'll be having them in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I know Melman Winters, who tried to get his microphone working before, has got his hand back up. And so since you were at the start of the queue, let's go back to you.
Thank you, Senator. Is my microphone working this time?
Yes, can hear you now.
Excellent, thank you. It's Matthias Lehman Winters. My computer did the autofill there. You mentioned that the National Guard would first come to Camp Riley over in Warrenton. I'm with the historian. We're just across the river here. Do you know when they might be arriving there?
Well, there's a lot of vagueness about the details, but my impression was that they have now been selected, and that training might start as soon as tomorrow. But that's more an inference from the way what was reported than a clear answer. It's exactly the sort of question we should be able to ask the National Guard and get a very clear answer on, but I don't have that precise of answer. And also, I understood the training would be 3 to 5 days. Well, 3 days, and if the training doesn't start for a couple days, or if it's 5 days, it's like we're not sure when the plan is that these federalized Oregon National Guard will actually be assigned, or exactly what they'll be assigned to do.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah.
All right, rapid fire. We're going to get through everyone. I promise. Spencer, why don't you kick it off for the last 5 questions? Last 5 questions or so.
Hi, Senator. Spencer Sachs with KTVZ News. Thank you for taking the time. 2 quick questions. First, Punchbowl News was reporting that Senator Schumer was calling around to different Democrats, seeing who was open to a 10-day CR for, ACA negotiations. Were you called by Senator Schumer? And if so, what was your response to him? Then I have a follow-up.
I have not talked to him on a recent phone call, but we've had a number of conversations in the last few weeks and intensive conversations in our caucus meetings. And I am really arguing that there are 2 moments when you can stop an authoritarian takeover of the government. And I encourage you all as journalists to check out the book, How Democracies Die. The 2 folks who wrote that are experts on watching and reporting on how republics have turned into strongman states. And essentially it happens with a combination of a rubber stamp legislature, which we have, a court that hands more power to the executive, which we have, and an aggressive authoritarian personality at the head of the executive, which we have. And the way that you prevent this from getting locked in is first of all, you have a fight. Because if everyone just sits back and says, we'll wait to confront this authoritarian force until later, it becomes more and more entrenched in the psyche of the nation that this is an acceptable way to conduct business. Right now, we are in the middle of such a fight, and it's important that we have it, and to ring the alarm bells about what's going on in America. And the second part is of those scholars is that the best opportunity to save we the people republic from an authoritarian takeover is the next election, because those authoritarians will start to rig the elections. And we also see Trump already doing that. He's trying to consolidate the databases for election across the country to make it easier to manipulate and purge those registration databases. We see his strategy of trying to do additional gerrymandering. He's doing it very out in the open by pushing on Texas and other states to try to further gerrymander their operations to control the House of Representatives. We see it with his attack on vote by mail. Why does he hate vote by mail? Because it's hard to manipulate. On election day, there's so much you can do to stop people from voting in places you don't want them to vote, that are heavily dominated by the opposite party. You don't want them to vote. So you move the precinct locations. You understaff them so that it slows down the process. You put the precinct locations where there's no parking, making it harder for people to vote. You send out intimidators to basically harass people who are standing in line. All of those sorts of things. That's why Trump hates vote by mail, because vote by mail protects the integrity of our elections. So these are 2 very important things to understand, that if we're going to save our country from this authoritarian takeover, we have to have a fight to say what's happening is out of the norm, out of the Constitution, and totally unacceptable. And we have to do everything we can to save our country through success in the next election.
Thank you for your answer, Senator, but would you have supported a 10-day CR in exchange for negotiations if Senator Schumer asked you?
No. No, we've had months and months to negotiate. We've laid out two very closely related, simple, digestible points, including the healthcare piece. A bunch of our Republicans are coming over to us and saying, we completely agree with you. So just saying we'll negotiate? No. Now, if the story was a commitment from the leadership of the Republican Party saying, yes, we're going to fix both of these issues, because you're right. The president has to follow the law, and we don't like this attack on healthcare either. And we got to work out some details, but let's come together. Let's keep the government open for 10 days. We're going to incorporate the 3 bills we've already passed in the Senate and that have been largely negotiated with the House. We're going to try to get the next 2 bills done, which if you take and address both the Armed Forces bill and the healthcare, that's 80% of the government. And we had those come out with high bipartisan majorities out of the Senate appropriations. If you had that sort of concrete, okay, we are going to quit this assault on Americans' healthcare, and we're going to protect our Constitution, which puts the power of the purse with Congress. Give us 10 days to work out the details, but if you had that, then yes, I'd support 10 days to get that done.
And then final question for you. There have been calls for Senator Schumer to step down as minority leader. Do you support those calls, and do you think he's the right man for the job?
I think it's a totally inappropriate question. He was elected, he serves for a 2-year period, and I haven't heard anybody in the Senate call for him to step down.
Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one question each. We'll start with Celine. You can be the last. We'll go with you, then we'll do one more question after that.
Alrighty, so again, thank you for taking our questions. Can you speak to the specific amount of Oregonians that are going to be impacted by this, whether it's furloughed or just the amount going without pay? And is there a point that you see you might just have to strike a deal so the government reopens so all these people aren't going without?
You know, Celine, the really interesting thing is that the president has already been pursuing a strategy of mass firing without a shutdown. And the shutdown doesn't technically give him any more powers in that regard. In fact, it might actually protect folks because of the requirement that people be furloughed until they're brought back. The only flexibility under the law the president has is essential versus non-essential. But everyone under the existing law receives pay when they're brought back in. That can be an enormous hardship at the end of the shutdown. Enormous hardship to forego pay until you're returned, but you get paid, and that's a part of the irony here, is that you get paid even if you're not working during that period when you come back on. But I don't want to understate the inconvenience to Americans, and this is like the behavior that exists in basically a underdeveloped republic, not a republic with 200 years of practice. President Trump decided to play chicken. He refused to talk. He drove his truck down the middle of the road, expecting everyone to clear the path for him to roll over the American people, and we said no. And so now he's willing to talk, and hopefully those talks will progress very quickly.
But if there's a
Clayton.
certain point, like after,
Oh,
if it
Celine,
goes on
sorry,
beyond a
Celine.
month.
We got to keep rolling. Clayton, if you want to give us our final question, then we can close out. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Senator Merkley. Clayton Frankie with Ben Bulletin. Do you see any impacts happening in the near term or long term of the shutdown on public land agencies like Forest Service or BLM?
Well, yes. For example, let's start with national parks, which often come up. National parks are not considered non-essential. However, protecting them from predatory practices that occurred under the Trump's 2018-2019 shutdown, that is considered protecting property. Plus, private donations can be accepted in order to provide protection for our parks or to keep them open. And that's being done through private donations or state funds in a number of places are expected to do that. So it's kind of hard to weigh how that will come out. But yes, I am very concerned already. I mean, so many people we have been lacking in key areas, but let's take firefighting. Well, that's essential. That's protection of property. So there's no reason there should be a change there. But they've already undercut the supply of our fire teams by firing so many people who due to our protests, some were rehired, but many weren't. So we have less staff than we should have for the fire season. Now, fire season is not over, so that's a concern. But they've already done the damage, but no further damage would be expected because of the shutdown itself. There's a whole list online of things that are affected and not affected, so I won't try to repeat that whole list there, but I will ask my team to post it on my website, which might be helpful to people.
Thank you all. Really, really appreciate everyone taking the time.
Hey,
And I
Justin,
will,
we've got 2 more hands up. Let's see. I do want to honor the 1 question each if we can rapid fire hit and Grace.
okay, Senator, we can make it happen. Amanda, we'll start with you, rapid fire, and then Grace, 1 question each. Thank you.
It is a short question. Senator Merkley, thank you for your time. Amanda Arden with CBS News. President Trump tweeted about within the last hour saying the National Guard is now in place. Can you clarify at all what now in place means? I don't see them at the ICE building here in Portland, but do you know what that means?
I don't know. I'm guessing he means that the 200 individuals have been selected and sent to Camp Rylea for training, would be my guess, but I don't know.
Thank you so much. Great.
They also
Grace?
mean the command structure from Northern Command has arrived in Oregon. He may mean that. It's definitely the sort of thing where it'd be nice to have the right appointed person clarify those details. We're all trying to get the best information we can, and it's very fuzzy.
Grace, thanks for your patience. Last question.
Yeah, of course. I'm Grace Ritz from Channel 12 in Medford. I just kind of really quick, easy question. We've gotten a lot of comments about how is this affecting Oregonians, the government shutdown. So is there anything you can say about what possibly some Oregonians could face with this government shutdown?
Well, we do know that certain things, for example, Social Security payments or retirement payments, well, those are Social Security. There's no changes in some of those basic services. Most of the things that are going to be affected are the discretionary side of the budget, not the mandatory side of the budget. And then in discretionary, it becomes whether the president determines them essential or non-essential. A thing that did concern me is the president said in making that judgment, he's going to weigh and instructing his secretaries to weigh, 1, whether they have been permanently or not permanently, whether they have been authorized and funded. And what that means is essentially the mandatory side is protected, but not the discretionary side. He said, and whether they fit with his priorities or not. Now that's where you see a continuation of the strategy of trying to exercise a presidential line item veto, continue programs he likes, discontinue those he doesn't like. That's exactly the same violation of the constitutional framework he's been pursuing without a shutdown. And I mean, that's not what the law says. It says essential, non-essential. It doesn't say things I like versus things I don't like. So that's a concern, but exactly where he'll draw the line between those two, I'm going to be having to hear from the president on that factor. And I do want to note in this regard that what we do know is how Oregonians are going to be hurt by the projected 68% increase when they sign back up for insurance in November on the exchange. We know they will be affected by the rising drug prices. We know they will be affected, even if they don't buy insurance on the exchange, by probably at least a 10% increase in their policies. We know that people in rural communities will be particularly affected by less revenue flowing in to their clinics and their hospitals. So all of those things we know for sure if we don't carry this fight to defend healthcare for Oregonians. I think that's probably a good moment for me to stop there on the same point I started with, which is Republicans have shut down the government in order to cut healthcare for families, in order to fund tax cuts for billionaires. This is absolutely wrong-headed. We are fighting for the families, and it's an important fight to the quality of life of everyone who lives in Oregon. Thank you all so much.
Thanks all.